Hello there and welcome to this vlog of June 2023. Slight change in plans. I was going to drop the Aries convention video this week, but I've moved that to next week. It's all recorded, but something came up over the last few days in the BattleTech community, a little bit of drama that I think is best placed being discussed as soon as possible, really, because these situations come up or they flare up and then they're usually forgotten about quite quickly. Just the way that like modern media is, I suppose. But if you don't speak about it like at the time or very, very soon after it all kind of dies down, then I feel like people stop caring, and it is quite an important issue, I think. So I'd rather do it now when people are still discussing it, even though it's kind of coming to the end of its, like, I suppose, news cycle, if you want to put it that way. Because I'm on holiday next week, if I waited until I got back and recorded this, it would be like quite old news at that point. So instead, I'm just going to reshuffle the way that I'm going to drop the videos, and I'm lucky because I've got a cheeky hour now before I go on holiday. Or, well, get my haircut first because it's looking very messy, as you can see. So haircut and then holiday. But the issue that I am talking about here is, of course, the issues on Reddit. How I want to do this, I'm going to give a synopsis of what happened. Although do keep in mind, I'm not like massively embroiled in this, so there might be other factors that I have not come across because, you know, a lot of people have opinions on this, and, you know, the noise around it gets like quite dramatic very, very quickly. What I've tried to do here is like distill what the issue is, and then obviously I'll give my opinion towards the latter part of this vlog. But one important thing to say first of all, and if you've watched my channel before, you'll know that I do say things like this a lot. I always try to take a rational approach to these things. I don't like the whole like extreme clickbaity nonsense. So you get people who've got very definitive dogmatic views on any given topic, and then they just basically bury the other side. I usually try to take a more nuanced approach. Not always, you know, there are certain things that I have my red lines on, as most people do, but you know, I'm not going to like play the game of just, oh, I've got a very definitive view on this, therefore everyone else is just wrong. You know, I try to be more nuanced than that. I think it's the duty of all of us to do that. I mean, I just don't like it when someone's got like what I'd consider quite extreme views, and they're the ones that then get the clicks and get the views because they are so vocal or charismatic. And it's just a failure of the species, really, that we do, or a lot of us do, get like drawn into that. So where possible, I try to keep things more like middle of the road, although I've got no problem giving quite spicy, prickly opinions, and I certainly will, you know, tell you what I think at the end of this video, and I won't hold back because, well, what's the point in going to the fairground if you're not going to ride on all the rides, right? Like that's kind of my theory on YouTube. Like, you know, I don't think people necessarily just want the facts. They do want conjecture and opinion and devil's advocates and things like that. It's one of those issues that it will garner heat for sure. Like I'm pretty sure that when I check the comments section on this page, it's going to attract people who have those very dogmatic views. I will either ignore them, or if it's like really visceral, I'll tell them where to go. Yeah, that's just the way I am. I don't particularly. I know a lot of people play lip service to that, but I work in that field. You know, I work in like high-end comms, so I don't have any problem at all either taking heat or giving heat, if you want to put it that way. Anyway, let's talk about Reddit and what happened. So the older or more experienced BattleTech fans amongst you will know that there has been a battle or you know, a subreddit for BattleTech for many years. I think the last time I seen comms on it, it was like really quite an old like subreddit. It's like 15, 20 years old, something like that. The guy that originally started this, I mean, Reddit back then, whenever this was, like 15 years ago, will have been a real shadow of what it is today in terms of, like, size. So obviously the person that started this up, they got kind of in front of the traffic and did it all. So it wasn't done through like an official channel. My understanding is, and again, this is just from looking at it from like the outside in, which is what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. The original creator then like moved out of the day-to-day running of it and handed it over to numerous different mods, or people who were running it in the back end or whatever else. Now, before I kind of discuss what happened in terms of the controversy, I'll declare an interest in this straight off the bat, which is, I always think you have to do if you're going to put any kind of media out on this. I really don't like the BattleTech Reddit forum. I've been on there quite a bit. Like historically, like when I came back into into BattleTech like properly several years ago, it was a very good format for like getting questions answered. So it'd been years since I played BattleTech, came back into it, and I'd forgotten so much. So if there was something I was unsure of, you could post it on Reddit, and you'd get some brilliant community members, and you still do on there, like answering questions. And there are loads of forums and places to do things like that. Obviously, it's not just Reddit. Reddit's just the most prominent one across the kind of internet at the moment, especially for gamers. I think there's a lot of like gaming stuff on there. So when I first like signed up to Reddit, I was like, oh yeah, this is fine, whatever. And then there was like a real sea change because. And I don't know when this happened, but I've not been on my Reddit page the BattleTech page for a long, long time, probably like well over a year. And as well as people asking questions on there about like events and BattleTech things and yada yada, you get people posting up a lot of art. I mean, that's predominantly what it's used for. And especially before like Catalyst Game Labs really had the first successful Kickstarter, they really were quite a small company. And they didn't have anything like the substructures in place to kind of get their marketing collateral out there. It's quite a difficult phrase. So they were using like community channels like Reddit and social media channels, which they still do obviously, but now they're able to do it on a more sophisticated level because obviously they're a bigger company and they've got like a dedicated resource to like customer service. They've got like a marketing manager, things like that. But back, even 4 or 5 years ago, it certainly wasn't like that for BattleTech. So I appreciated what Reddit did, in that era. And I didn't have any bad experiences. I mean, people, you may say, oh yeah, it's been rotten on the Reddit thing for X amount of years. Maybe I just didn't see it. But where I started having negative situations on there, and there were several, but I'll give you the one which kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and then we'll get into what the actual controversy is from recent days. I'd posted a picture on there of several like mechs, official mechs, so it'll have been either the Catalyst Game Labs new plastics, or it will have been a mixture of them and the Ironwind models. I don't have any 3D mech or 3D printed mechs. I do have some 3D printed infantry, but they are literally the only like non-official units or plastic metal units that I have for all of BattleTech. I don't like 3D printed units. I never think they look very good. That's my opinion, right? Like, you can absolutely have a different opinion, and it is a lot cheaper. Obviously, if you're buying like the files for and doing your own 3D printing, obviously that's a lot cheaper. BattleTech's always been a lot more casual on enforcing like the rules surrounding their IP than a lot of other gaming systems. So there is kind of a tradition of that happening. Again, I'm not going to discuss the morality of that because it's outside of the confines of what I'm going to discuss today. But everything on there was official, apart from that I'd post. There's no reason I'd ever post the pictures of my infantry because it's too small and it's really difficult to get good photos of them. And it's infantry, like it's the mechs that people really want to see, I think. So just to clarify that point, everything that I'd posted will have been official. apart from the terrain, right? Because there is no official BattleTech 3D terrain. There certainly wasn't at the time. There kind of is now, but it's the cardboard trees and buildings that you get in the Alpha Strike box set, which is like, something that you'd expect a beginner to use, really. If you're really kind of into hobby stuff, you're going to have lots of terrain, like I do down here. I mean, these are just boxes of terrain and mats and all kinds of things down there. It's all either 3D printed or I've bought it from. There's a lot of Games Workshop stuff down there because Games Workshop make a lot of terrain, but BattleTech don't. And so everything that, if I'm going to do like a little diorama and post it on somewhere like Reddit or on Twitter with mechs and scenery, the scenery is not going to be official because no such official stuff exists. Now, okay, I was going to lead into another point there, but I'll say something else first and then I'll lead into what I was going to say. So I posted this on Reddit, and again, this is one of a multiple number of issues that I had, but this was the straw that broke the camel's back. After a time, you get lots of like people liking the comments and liking your pictures or whatever, and then like putting things in the comments below, all manner of stuff. I mean, my experiences on Reddit in that regards were quite positive. Like people were saying, it looks great, or why did you choose those particular mechs to do it in that Pat Force or whatever? Like you get, it's just a nice little discussion forum. Somebody on there had said to me, "Oh, love the terrain. Where did you get the terrain from?" And they were asking about a couple of things on this. I had some buildings on there, and this was a while ago, and I've not gone and reopened this, so I could be getting this wrong, but I think this is what they asked. They asked, if you look right above my head here, you'll see that there's a leopard and a broadsword dropship, and they were on there as well. It was like if I remember rightly, the picture was like mechs coming out of those dropships, or the leopard. So I replied to this person as a courtesy, obviously. Oh, I got the terrain from blah blah blah, and I got the dropships from blah blah blah. And within like an hour, the posts were removed, and I had like I can't remember if I got an email or if it was a post on there from one of the mods saying that I'd broken terms and conditions in regards like promoting pirated material or something along that. Maybe not to that aggressive extent in terms of what they'd written, but along those lines for sure. And I just completely checked out after that. I mean, I didn't reply, I didn't bother. I'm far too busy. So at that point, I was just like, I don't think this is for me because this is ridiculous. So I didn't give any kind of official complaint to it or anything like that. And I've not thought about it since it happened until all this controversy came up with Reddit recently. But now looking back at it now, I'll articulate it as to what my problem was. So obviously the IP owners of BattleTech, the intellectual property rights are owned by Tops, who then license it out to Catalyst Game Labs. Now, there is no license for 6mm board gaming. Yeah, terrain is just 6mm terrain. Anyone can make it. There's no trademark on it. There is a trademark on the dropships, so like the Leopard and the Broadsword within the BattleTech universe, they are a thing designed and owned by the custodians or owners of the IP. But this is where it gets murky, and this will lead me in now to what's happened recently on the Reddit forums. They don't monetize it, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong in this, but they've never made full-scale leopards and broadswords before. So the only option for you to get that, if you want it, is to go and get them 3D designed and print it out yourself, or get someone to print it for you and then post it to you. Catalyst as well, I completely agree with their standpoints on closing down third parties, basically stealing their copyrighted content like mechs, and then worse, like advertising it as such. So you go to a 3D printing company and it'll say, oh, the BattleTech catapult, and then it's a picture of a mech that looks like 99% like a catapult. It is illegal. You are breaking copyright law by doing that for sure. And Tops have got a legal team, and they will certainly be enforcing that and telling Catalyst to enforce it. I absolutely guarantee that. I mean, they'd be crazy not to. First of all, because it eats into their revenue streams because they make the same product, obviously. But also because you've got to be really careful with your intellectual property, because if you don't defend it, and then one day you've got a real problem on your hands because someone just rips you off and uses your like copyrighted material, it's difficult to kind of go in front of a judge then if it goes to that level and goes to court and say, well, we're here to defend our copyright, and our IP, and the judge or whoever's basically acting as like the arbitrator in this would probably turn around and say, well, what's changed, because you've not been defending it for 15 years, so why are you starting now? And it really kind of puts a dampener on your case. And that's why a lot of companies like proactively go after people broaching their trademarks. It's not really, it might not have any impact on money, but it's certainly like we need to do this to defend our future selves and to future-proof ourselves against any really serious copyright infringement. BattleTech, though, and this is something where I will be going against the grain when I say that. I'm acutely aware of this, and because I've got a very commercial mindset because of the kind of business that I operate in. Gamers in general have a gaming mindset, and it's all about let's be collaborative and let's be nice to each other, and we shouldn't want to monetize these things. And as much as I admire that, and I do, and I feel like that to many extents as well, but it is still a business, right? And Catalyst are still trying to make money, and if they don't make money, then they'll get stripped of the license, and then people lose their jobs. So they've got to take this very, very seriously. So it's all well and good saying, like, and I get into this conversation a lot, especially with people like on Twitter or in the comments here, when people say like, oh, Catalyst, how dare they say that we can't have 3D printed mechs anymore? We've had 3D printed mechs in BattleTech since time immemorial. Not 3D printed, but like the old like ethos with BattleTech that you can play it with like bottle caps or anything you want, and they used to really push that as a thing. Like, you don't need to spend a lot of money on this game. You just need like a hex map, and you need just some coins that represent mechs, and then you can go ahead and play. They really are like the antithesis of a firm like Games Workshop, really, who kind of monetize everything, make loads of terrain. They only allow official models at their tournaments, things like that. So I get why BattleTech is seen as much more inclusive, but you must look at it a little bit more nuanced, and to a point, and where you have to say, well, the people that originally decided on that as a for want of a better term, a philosophy, actually made quite a big mistake, both in terms of like trying to protect their IP and future-proofing themselves, and not monetizing it and not getting as much as they could out of it if they wanted to sell the IP on or whatever else. And I know that sounds really greedy, but that's just the world that we're in. They're not going to make these models if nobody's going to buy them or there's no demand for it. Obviously, there is demand for it, and it's all well and good kind of going down the 3D print route and saving a lot of money. But by definition, then you've taken money out of the thing that you like and given it to a third party who's not going to reinvest it back into the IP. So it does become a bit of a vicious circle. And I do think a lot of it's like ideology over the pragmatics of the situation, which always should be a balance between the commercial and keeping your customer base happy. So do I think, therefore, that there is a room for 3D printing? Yes, I 100% do. In fact, if Catalyst aren't monetizing it, then like I've said here on the drop ships up here, Catalyst aren't going to go after the people that make the drop ships because they don't monetize it themselves. If they did, then that might change. But for now, we don't have any options. Again, it's a tenuous area, but it's not something where I think anyone's kind of like losing any sleep on Catalyst's side. I mean, I think they did drop ships, like the big, like the Union drop ship, something like that, on the last Kickstarter. I didn't get one, and I've never seen them for sale. I think it was just a part of the Kickstarter. So, there is always room for like community-based initiatives like 3D printing to really help out. Infantry is another good one. The official infantry for BattleTech is just awful. They're so antiquated. It just, even back, if you'd have got them in the 90s, it would have been garbage. Whereas now, like, things have just come on so much. There's so much more detail, even on those like tiny little 6mm like soldiers that you can get. And I don't doubt, I mean, they're already doing battle armor, so undoubtedly they'll go into the infantry line one day, and undoubtedly I will buy them. But until then, I have to use a proxy because, again, the official things, and I think they would acknowledge this. I don't think anyone at either at Ironwind or at Tops or at CGL would look at the infantry and say, "Oh yeah, we're giving our fan base here a lot of options." But when you've got like the new plastics coming out, so like the catapult, for instance, which I've raised, as the example of the 3D, like the catapult official model is amazing. It's been designed by someone who's taken so much care and love on it. And then for someone just to come along and say, "Oh, well, I'm going to advertise this now as a catapult in BattleTech," and then, you're going to have to take money away from the IP, but yeah, you get it for a few dollars cheaper. I don't agree with that. I can't sit here and proclaim I do, and I never have done. I think if you go back and watch previous videos that I did, I've always kind of made pretty stringent remarks on it that I won't, buy 3D printed mechs in particular. So that was kind of my situation with Reddit. That's where I didn't fall out with anyone over it. I just stopped using it. And that all came, I know I've waffled on there a bit about 3D printing, because this topic is not about 3D printing. But that's my point, is that there is an officious mod element within that Reddit forum who were trying to close things down, which they had no right to do. And that segues us into the issue that we've had over the last few weeks. And what I'll do is, on this, I'll now tell you kind of what happened, and then I'll give my opinion on it. So, there was recently a group of BattleTech fans who created an unofficial anthology of LGBTQ plus like stories within the BattleTech universe. I know some of these writers. I speak to them on like social media, not well, granted, but I know who they are. I sometimes have like discussions with them. They're all, the people that I've spoken to have been involved in this anthology are very nice. There was also a forward in this anthology from Brian Young, who's one of the like new generation of BattleTech writers. I think it's Brian Young. Anyway, I've never read any of his books yet, but that name is in my head. Hopefully I got that right. Apologies if I got that wrong, Brian, if that's your name. But there was also the person who we all know, who was also on the forward, is Michael Stackpole, who is really the daddy of BattleTech fiction. Wrote so many like famous books across the IP, and they both held or gave their credence to it, put a forward in there. So again, it wasn't official. It was a fan project. It was completely wholesome and innocent, and I've not read them. I've downloaded it, so I will read it at some point, no doubt. But what I'm saying is, it wasn't some hate-filled rhetoric or anything like that. It was, it was a very, from my understanding, and I know people who have read it who said, "Oh yeah, it was actually good," or people who really enjoyed it, and it is what it is, right? It's Pride Month. They kind of aligned it with Pride Month, and there you go. They'd released some fan fiction. They then went on Reddit, or some people went on Reddit to start promoting this anthology, and the mods went on and removed all the posts. Now, the reason being, and this is where it gets farcical, in my opinion. So they had these like rules written on there, which again, I'm sure that they were done innocently by the original person that created the subreddit. But there was a clause in there. I mean, and the first clause is quite obvious, right? So it was something like, everything must be BattleTech related that you post about. Okay, it's the BattleTech subreddit, fine. So you can't go on there and start posting about, I don't know, Volvo engines. Actually, Volvo engines could be quite pertinent in the BattleTech universe. Can't remember if Volvo still exists. But, like if it's something like, I don't know, DIY of my kitchen or something clearly not related to BattleTech. They also had a clause in there, and this is where it gets just really weird, that you couldn't post anything what they deemed as, and I put this in like quotes, real world politics after 1988. I know. So you could presumably talk about the Cold War in fact, you couldn't talk about the Cold War because that technically finished in the early 90s. So Okay, but maybe you could talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was in the 60s, but you couldn't talk about the fall of the Berlin Wall because that was in the 90s. I don't even know. I don't even know if what I'm saying here is correct. That was just kind of the measure of it when I looked at the copy, and I was like, "Is this who wrote? Who decided that was a thing?" I'm guessing they did it because like BattleTech is an 80s IP, so it's like anything up to the point of this arbitrary 88 figure that is relates, and it's old enough back in time where no one will, if you're giving like a hot take on Ronald Reagan at this juncture, then I don't think many people are going to get that offended about it. Whereas if you give a hot take on like Donald Trump, people will give an active opinion because it's still an ongoing issue. He's still trying to become a president or trying to become president again and whatever else. So I don't know if that's a factor in there as well, but it's just it's a blurred line that I can't even get my head around as how they came up with that one. And I think, and this is where it gets problematic. And I think I read this on an article that was released about this. It might have been on Polygon. It was on one of the. See, it got picked up a little bit by the gaming news, this story anyway. One of the mods had said something like, "Well, Pride's something that didn't really start up until I don't know," and I can't remember. It's like a 1990s thing. Therefore, it's in excess of the date that we had agreed, right? In terms of our like 1988, like date. First of all, that's not true. Pride is something that, or the concept of pride goes way back into the 60s as far as I knew. So they don't know the history. So beyond the ridiculousness of it, they are just wrong, I think. If they, by their own kind of metric, they are incorrect. But this is where it gets really like, for want of a better term, you start getting into like a real grey area on this now. And that is who then decides what real world politics is. Because BattleTech is absolutely, fundamentally ingrained in real world politics. Like the Koreans are a Japanese feudalist society. The Capellans are a mixture of like Chinese and Soviet communism. The Federated Sons are kind of a bit of a, I suppose, like a constitutional monarchy, call them something like that. Same with Lyran Commonwealth. Everything from BattleTech comes from some form of real world history, real world politics, and I'm not, and I know what they're saying. I know why they are saying, "Oh, you can't put real world politics in there." What they're saying is they don't want people to be arguing on there about who's going to be the next president of the United States. That's what they are saying on there. And I get that because that causes a lot of like negative discussion and division and everything else. So fine, I get that. But Pride, or the anthology, which has got like the Pride colours on it, so it's obviously the kind of the awareness month for like LGBTQ plus. The political dimension to this, or the real world politics to it, is it's not people having arguments over who they are voting for. It's a movement that aspires to give fairness in society to a demographic, right? So how they can just turn around and say, "Oh, this is real world politics, therefore bad, therefore we're going to delete the posts," is incredibly ignorant. And there is a lot of disingenuous activity going on here. I think it's really kind of, almost like a bad actor scenario where they can try to sell it as much as they want. And I will openly say this if I meet these mods or speak to these mods. I don't know who they are. They are masking their really horrible homophobic views with this like pseudo intellectualism. Whether it's this like, "Oh, we're gonna read into the rule of the law as opposed to the spirit of the law," and say that anything post 1988 was not welcome here, in terms of if it's even veering towards something that we deem like a political issue. Beyond the fanciful ridiculousness of that statement in of itself, who then is the arbitrator of that? Who then decides? Because I'll give you a for instance. What happens if I wrote a BattleTech story about a gulag in Capellan space, and there will be many gulags in Capellan space. There are still gulags around now, shockingly enough, right? So, is that something? If I wrote fan fiction on that, well, that technically breaches into like modern politics because it's still around today. Therefore, or does that? If is this? What about if somebody writes an official book where there's a gulag in it? Like BattleTech is by definition a human drama, which is all backed up by human history and human society and politics and everything else. And I'm just failing to get my head around how the mods thought that anyone could like fall for that or think it was anything other than them just taking, by definition, by them saying we have not got a political horse in this race, that is by definition a political response. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand politics. Saying nothing is sometimes the loudest thing that you can say. Or their activity by, removing things from like forums or starting to kind of cause issues like they've been doing is, by definition, you are making a political stance on that. They will use all these they will use things like hypocrisy as a shield. I don't need an opinion on that. I know that that's the truth. I know that these people will be, they'll generally be quite right-wing. I'm not saying they're extremists, but they'll have right-wing sentiments. They won't like the whole concept of pride and what it represents, and they're trying to close members of the community down because of it. And that's wholly wrong. And again, I go back to, if you are going to set up something like a subreddit, and then you are going to ask people to comment on there and come on there, you need a set of rules to a degree. So one of the things that you'd say is, and I know they'll use watery phrases like "be nice." I think you have to just really push the respect factor. It's like you are allowed to disagree on here, but you are not allowed to start directing personal hate or spreading rumours or doing anything that that say like a court would judge as being libelous or getting you into legal trouble or something like that. Like obviously you need to put like parameters in place. That is what mods are for. But what mods are not there for is to be the arbitrator of like morality, if you want to put it that way. And again, if by definition them trying to kind of, and I use this term loosely because it's a controversial phrase in its own right, but people talk about gatekeeping. And this is them saying like, well, we're gatekeeping, so you can't have what you want as a fan-made creator on something that is supposed to be for the entire community. And again, I go back, that is wrong. It's not in their remit to do that. They shouldn't be able to do that. This is, there are gay people and trans people who enjoy BattleTech, and they have every right to write stories or to, paint mechs in the Pride flag colours or everything else. It's as much a part of the community as me painting a Lance of Lyran mechs, right? That's just the way it is. Yeah, so you can, and BattleTech's always been quite open on that front. The community is generally very responsive and open to that. And there are obviously, you're always going to get, minority opinions who take a more extreme view, which is, where I kind of place the mods or trying to kind of keep people out of it. Nothing that these people who wrote the anthology did was wrong. Okay, so if you write a Pride anthology and it's really anti-Semitic, right, then you'd have every right to be like, yeah, that's crossing the line. This is a hate-fueled document. And I've not read these yet, but I guarantee you that they are very, very mild. I've said mild, like they won't be like full of controversial hate-filled points. I am sure of that. I mean, it's got Michael Stackpole, aligned to this, who's a very lovely man. So he will have, I bet you anything, he like read them and gave them advice on it and whatnot. Most importantly though, and this is where I have a real bugbear with this, it's still BattleTech stuff, like the stories. I mean, I briefly went through one of them. It is about mechs and BattleTech and all the how. It's not just like someone's supplanted something that's not BattleTech onto BattleTech. It's BattleTech told from the point of view of people who have got like an interest in the, for want of a better term, the human journey of people who are not heteronormative. There you go. So, and I'm literally like bending my mind trying to realise why people have an issue with that. And I know that it's a cultural thing that's spilling out of America at the moment. All this like, this division that occurs between, or populist politicians basically spinning up yarns and driving up people's like animosities in order to kind of, to touch those emotional points, which then get people to vote for them, spills out everywhere. And it's something that, it's a great shame because it's very, very divisive. And, and it's all a complete sham, really, because the whole, like things like, I mean, the Americans have done this for years now. You've got things like Black History Month and Pride Month, which is, Pride's not exclusively an American thing, but obviously Black History Month, that's very much an American thing. I mean, I'm sure it gets celebrated in other parts of the world as well. And, there's a legitimate reason, and I know plenty of like people from black backgrounds who don't like Black History Month. I mean, I think quite famously, actually, Morgan Freeman really doesn't like it and won't have anything to do with it. I remember seeing an interview with him, and he said, it was years ago that I saw this interview, but he said something like, I don't want a Black History Month because Black history is American history. And the commentator, and I can't remember, maybe the commentator had like a German name or something like that, and Morgan Freeman said, so you're German? Yeah. Well, do you want a German History Month or a White History Month? And the interviewer was like, no. And he's like, exactly. So I get why, and it's obviously that's a completely fair and balanced approach to take. And I've met a lot of people across the LGBT plus community, plus community who don't like Pride Month. They think it's become over corporatized. I'm right in the thick of this because I work for corporates where Pride Month is often celebrated, and you do have to tread carefully. I mean, I've had communications with people who say things like, I hate the fact that we are kind of, we're doing this to almost like purify our brand off the back of a cause that I know that most companies do have like really proactive, good, whether it's like gender equality or LGBTQ plus. Certainly all the companies I've worked for have had really kind of good proactive policies on things like this. But they're still not perfect, right? Like like in law firms, for instance, we're still miles away from having like 50% gender split between female and male partners. It's something we love to aspire to, but it's so difficult to get to, and every year it gets a little bit better. But like what people like, a woman has every right to say, how dare you like parrot this like we are all gender equal, and then you've got 10% females in your partnership and 90% male, right? So it's something that I'm not making like a moral aspersion on it and just saying, oh yeah, this is the absolute fact. I get that this is a very, very emotional thing. It's a very complex thing, and but to criticize Pride is completely out of the remit of this. Again, there are people who have genuine issues with Pride because of how corporate it has become, and this happened. There's stories. Just go and Google this. You'll see stories everywhere of firms using it to kind of whitewash their PR, and it's something that, especially like in my industry, it can get very emotive. If firms are seen to be like, say, discriminating against people for whatever reason, while openly saying yes, but we're really inclusive. So, and I think that hypocrisy is where a lot of the visceral comes for. It's misplaced visceral, but I think it's a mixture of hypocrisy and people feeling it's like being forced down their throat. And when you've got it then happening in, say, like the BattleTech community, people just like have an emotional reaction to it. These mods have had an emotional reaction to it. And that emotional reaction, as much as I try to understand it, I just can't, because I just ask the question, who is this hurting? And your answer to that is only ever going to be very homophobic, because your answer is, and it's the old tired notion of that, people who are gay are, I mean, this is what I think some people genuinely think, which disgusts me, but they think that like there is an element to it which is, and I don't really want to go into it because this is a family friendly channel, but let's just say like deviant. I'll just use that word. And that, I mean, I've known so many gay people that, and I cannot get into that headspace. I find it really offensive. It's ridiculous, and I think it's a mixture between like a lack of empathy and a lack of education and a lack of like worldliness. Like when I get it, if you brought up in like rural middle of nowhere and you've never met a gay person and the only impression you have from a gay person is from your homophobic family, then I'd be like, okay, I can understand why that person feels this way, but when you meet a gay person or a trans person, if you look beyond that, they're just people, right? Like they've got all the same kind of positives, negatives, quirks that any other human being has, and but gay people really have to fight for their right to exist and live how they want to live on this planet. And I really would ask people to keep that in mind when they engage with this subject, because like in the West, we've got very, very they're still not ideal, but we are very more accepting of like, say, like the gay lifestyle or gender equality or things like that. We are by no means perfect, but we try to at least resolve these things. In many parts of the world, gay people can be murdered. And I will not use the word executed, because executed means that there's some kind of official legal sense behind it. I use the term which I think, murdered. Regimes will, literally stone. I mean, it happened with ISIS, right? Like ISIS were throwing gay men off buildings, literally throwing them off buildings and recording it, which is just, horrifying and disgusting. And so that reason alone means that something like Pride has got a really worthwhile place in society to kind of promote the notion that if we don't actively try to fix these things and to make people like tolerant of them, then you end up with this place where we might spiral back into a place where like the state start, outlawing people for having a sexual preference. And I see this especially in American society. It's like, I mean, it's so disturbing, especially especially for trans people. I think like there's this notion of in some areas where it almost looks like it could turn very, very nasty. Where you have like they're taking away service provision, they're taking away like medical facility, and that's to me like the thin end of the wedge. Like if that continues on in that current guise, eventually you are locking people up for being trans. And I don't mean that in an over emotive, over sensationalist ways, but our history tells us that the second you allow that kind of darkness in, it only gets worse unless you really try to stop it and shine a light on it. And it's our duty to do that. I know that the West isn't perfect, but my God, I mean, if you look at some of the dark, horrifying places on this planet and the regimes that they have to deal with, we have it very good in comparison. I mean, just the fact that I work with gay people and nobody batters an eyelid, the fact that, like, from a social mobility standpoint, I was born to a single parent, household in, like, a rough estate in South Leeds. I'm now really quite, I've had a successful career. I've had, this, and society and, having been lucky enough to have decent family members and, not to go down dark paths, which could have easily happened with me, but I've been given those opportunities, and without not being in a country which allows you or affords you those opportunities would have meant that I would have just been working in a factory somewhere or in jail when I was 21, because that's what happened to a lot of my friends growing up. So, whatever it is, social mobility, LGBT rights, or, gender equality, this notion, this weaponization of it by certain people is just heinous, and we are not going to realise what we've had here until we've lost it. And I know that this is a BattleTech channel, right? And this is overtly political points that I'm making here, and I don't apologise for that, because if it spills out onto things that I love, like BattleTech, we have got a duty, or the people amongst us who care about this really have a duty to stand up and be counted and say no. No to the mods that refuse this. It's not their place to do it. It's not acceptable. The gay people across the BattleTech community, of which, there will be quite, I don't know the numbers, but there will be, a significant percentage who identify with like being gay or trans. If we don't create a space for them to feel like they can, be themselves and operate and not take any judgment on it, then we're failing those people. And I always think you can judge any society on how it judges, say, a minority. If minorities are discriminated against and or worse, physically brutalized, then that society has failed, right? And I don't want that for the BattleTech community, and nor should anybody operating across the BattleTech community. We should be working to make this as, and I know these words have got emotional, tendencies behind them, but people use words like inclusion, and it's a good word to use. Like, you should not be trying to divide or discourage people. And this anthology was done very, honestly, and people put a lot of time and a lot of love into it, and I just can't believe that people think they have the right to close it down. It's just highly offensive. And final word on this, because we're coming up to like 3/4 of an hour now, but I'm really glad how Catalyst acted as well. Catalyst, I think this was through Rem, who's the new marketing manager. I'm sure it was a joint decision. They stepped in, and fair play to them, they created an official BattleTech Reddit section, which literally, I think like 8,000 people migrated over to there immediately, where, with the caveat of, you can post the, what you want about the anthology on here, and anything else to do with whether it's LGBT Q plus or anything like that. And I think they changed the rules a little bit. I think, ironically, they've still got the rule about no real world politics, but I think it's much more judged on the, don't be coming on here talking about the presidential elections for the US this year, because that's just going to cause chaos. But you can absolutely talk about, like a BattleTech story that has LGBTQ people within it, right? That is still BattleTech. So they went in and fixed that, although recently I think it's now been announced that they don't want control of it, but the person who was originally in charge of the older BattleTech subreddit has kicked out all the mods, and they've now kind of working with Catalyst to get new community guidelines in place. I'm really delighted by that. It's a really shrewd move by BattleTech, by Catalyst Game Labs for BattleTech, where they just went in and were like, right, if you can't play nicely, we're just going to create a new area over here. And the result was justified. The mods got kicked. I'm sure new mods will be put in now, and they've got new community guidelines to adhere to, and they now know that CGL are serious about this, and if anyone starts any of this nonsense again, then they will act, and they can start putting real parameters down now. So going back to my initial point, on my complaint about like the copyrighted material stuff, which I was being called a pirate for getting 6mm terrain. Catalyst now and they're much more like, they're not like these faceless mods who are just kind of arbitrarily saying, oh yeah, just because I don't want to be looked at as being a hypocrite, I'm going to ban everything, right? Catalyst will look at like the Leopard dropship up there and be like, yeah, that's fine, we don't make those, right? But I think they have said on there, please don't post like third-party 3D models on here, because that is technically something we have to go after. It breaks our IP. Again, that's a discussion for another time, and I think I've covered a lot of that on the channel anyway, and my thoughts on it, and I've kind of given some like legal insight into it. But regardless, the situation is now fixed with Reddit, I believe. I'm hoping that this creates a new dawn, because Reddit is important. It's a great news source. It's a really good for like posting art. And the great thing about this, your audience are all BattleTech fans. It's not like on Twitter where and it's hard on Twitter because you're dealing with like lots of politics and sport and gaming and things like that. And I post quite a bit on Twitter, and it very quickly becomes quite convoluted. On BattleTech Reddit, it's just like, oh look, anything that I post on here, it's going to be BattleTech related, or it's not going to, or it's got that captive audience, and they're going to know what I'm talking about. If I start talking about the FedCom Civil War, people will know what that means. I don't have to go into any kind of further discussion on that. So really glad that they've sorted that out. Kudos to Catalyst for acting, and kudos to the original creator of the subreddit as well, who I think was, and I can't guarantee to say this for sure because I don't know the chap, but I think he was quite upset about how the mods had acted and basically went and kicked them all off, which really did kind of force the issue and force it to be solved. So wins all around, I think, and lessons learnt. And again, if you are watching this now and you are boiling over, like with hatred or whatever else it is, I just ask you to reevaluate how you look at this. I just urge you to self-reflect on it, and what harm is this doing, right? And if you answer that question honestly, it's a homophobic answer that you've got, and it's just, homophobia obviously comes from a very, very hate-filled place, and it's not healthy for you, it's not healthy for society. And I'm not, I don't mean it in like a lectury way, this, but you're just doing yourself no favours whatsoever. And I just urge you to just meditate and reflect on it, and go out there and go to speak to one of these authors. I mean, I'm making an assumption that all the authors are LGBTQ+. I don't know, but there are people on there who I know you can find very easily on Twitter who have like written these books. They're very open people. Like, you could go on there and get to know them, and you'll realise that your sense of hate comes from a very, very selfish, weird place. And I'd urge you to do it, just again for your own state of mind, if nothing else. And now, if you're now going to go and mash the keyboard and start writing, how wrong I am and how this is threatening the very existence of BattleTech, then just keep in mind that your opinion on that is just, you're bringing it in from a place which is not genuine, right? That's all I can tell you. That you've been coerced and manipulated into having a hateful viewpoint, and it's not cool to do that. Anyway, I'm going to leave that here. I hope this was met in the way that it is meant, which is kind of a genuine assessment and a plea for the community to not engage in bad behaviour, and to love your fellow BattleTech fan, regardless of where they come from or anything, any way that they identify themselves or the colour of their skin or anything else, and not just BattleTech but beyond that. Just we need unity now, like, especially like across the West. Like, our lifestyles are really under threat at the moment, like really under threat. We thought we'd won in the 80s and 90s. We thought that it was the end of tyranny and despots, and we were wrong. And we need that kind of coercion. We need to show the world that there is a much better way to do this. We don't need to get embroiled in hatred and conspiracy theories and nonsense. Like, just be careful where you get your opinion from. The podcasts out there, and there's plenty of media on YouTube that is just full of hateful rhetoric, and under this like real veneer of like over intellectualism, or like putting people in logic traps. Like, you can't think that because that makes you a hypocrite. And if the place comes from a place of hate, if the theory comes from a place of hate, it's hateful, and you should avoid it like the plague. Anyway, I'm now going to get my hair cut, and then I'm going on holiday. So I will see you all in a few weeks. There will be a video next week, so that will drop. So it probably won't even look like I've been away. But I may come back with a little bit of not a tan. I don't really tan. I'm too fair-skinned. But, it's very nice weather. I think while I'm away, it's going to be quite hot. So that will be very nice. Anyway, I'll bid you all a fond farewell, and I'll hopefully catch you again next time.